The sun had no mercy. It leaned heavy across the plains, flattening what little life clung to the scrub. Wind skated the dust in slow spirals, hissing low through the brittle grass, like something alive and angry. Overhead, the sky pressed down without a single cloud to soften it. The land was beige and bone-colored, broken only by rusted fence wire and the carcass of a wagon wheel half swallowed by time. She walked alone, her shadow dragging behind her like a tether to the past. Her boots were cracked, soles near gone, and her feet ached so fiercely it made her jaw tremble. A patch of dried blood soaked into the hem of her skirt where it brushed the scabs at her calves. She didn't look at them anymore. There was no point. The lashes had healed, at least on the outside. Inside was a different kind of wound. A crow cried from a fence post, black eyes watching as she passed. Its voice was hoarse and ragged, like it had been screaming into silence for days. She understood that. She hadn't eaten since the river, a muddy trickle she'd crossed yesterday morning, just before the fever had crept back into her bones. The sun made her dizzy. Her hands shook when she wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist. The heat had baked the tears right out of her. Up ahead, a mailbox leaned sideways at the edge of a long dirt road. The paint was flaked off. The name, something short and hard like Hayes or Hart, had faded, but it stood like a gatepost. Beyond it stretched a line of cottonwoods that seemed to breathe in the stillness, the only green for miles. Behind them, half hidden in the haze of dust and heat, stood a house with a roof dark as dried blood and a chimney listing slightly to one side. She stopped, stared. There was no welcome sign, no porch rocker, no wind chime or flowers in the windowsill, but there was smoke from the chimney and the smell subtle and real of something baking. Bread, maybe, or beans with ham. It clawed at her throat like hunger had claws. She clutched the strap of her satchel tighter, though it carried nothing but a scrap of cloth, a pair of cracked spectacles, and a letter with no return address. She didn't know why her feet turned up the drive. Maybe it was the smoke. Maybe it was the bird song from the cottonwoods, thin and ghostly as a hymn. Maybe she'd finally gone mad from sun and silence and shame. But she walked, one step after another, past the fence and through the gate, her heart thudding like a door being slammed from the inside. By the time she reached the porch, her legs gave out. She collapsed against the steps, chest heaving, eyes burning. The sweat on her neck turned cold. She heard children's voices from somewhere, laughter, high and sweet. Then the creak of a door. Boots stepped close. A shadow fell over her. "Miss?" a voice said, low and cautious. She tried to answer, but her mouth wouldn't move. The world had begun to tilt again. A pair of rough hands, calloused but careful, touched her shoulder. Then darkness folded in like a curtain. She didn't know how long it lasted, hours or days. She woke in a bed with cotton sheets and a quilt that smelled faintly of wood smoke and cloves. A wash basin sat beside her, steam still rising from it. Someone had wiped her face. Someone had cleaned the dried blood from her legs. Outside the window, the wind had picked up, rustling the cottonwoods like they were whispering secrets to one another. The door creaked again. She turned her head, slow and aching. He stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn chambray shirt and a look that was part concern, part wariness. His beard was the color of rust, and his eyes were tired in a way that suggested loss, not laziness. "You're safe here," he said. "Reckon you ought to rest a while." She wanted to ask why he hadn't turned her away, why he didn't ask her name or story, but the words felt far away. He nodded, as if reading the silence. "I'm Jonah. There's coffee when you're steady enough to sit. My kids'll keep their distance." Kids. The word landed hard. Something inside her cracked, barely audible. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "You got the look of someone been to hell and back. Ain't my business what sent you. Just don't reckon it's still chasing you here." He left the door open a little. She stared at that sliver of hallway. Light spilled in, dust hanging in it like gold. The silence was kind. The next morning came slow, like it was trying not to wake her. Light eased through the window, pale and gentle, not the blinding sheet of heat it had been yesterday. The wind had shifted. She could smell rain somewhere far off, sharp and clean. The quilt on her body was heavier than she'd remembered. She didn't move, not yet. Her body was sore in that deep, hollow way that went beyond muscle and into bone. Voices filtered in from beyond the room, children arguing in soft tones, the clatter of a tin cup on wood, and the low murmur of a man's voice smoothing the morning into place. The scent of fried cornmeal drifted through, mingled with black coffee and something sweet. She sat up, slow as thawing ice, and winced. Her hands were pale but steady. Her dress had been washed, still threadbare, but clean and folded over the chair beside the bed. A long flannel shirt, too large for her frame, hung neatly over it. She guessed it was Jonah's. There was something steadying about that thought. She washed her face, dressed in silence, then opened the door. The hallway was narrow, floors worn smooth by time. Pictures hung crooked on the wall, one of a woman with dark braids and solemn eyes, and 3 children squinting into sunlight. She didn't stop to study their faces. In the kitchen, Jonah stood at the stove, a towel thrown over his shoulder. The back door was open, letting in the smell of damp earth and the soft huff of horses from the yard. A boy sat at the table, maybe 11 or 12, whittling a stick with a dull knife. 2 younger girls played with dolls made from corn husks on the floor. All 3 looked up when she entered. Jonah turned. "Mornin', you're up." She nodded once. "I made Johnny cakes," he said. "Coffee's there if you want it." She didn't answer, just moved toward the table and sat, every movement tight and measured, like her body hadn't quite decided it was safe yet. Her fingers closed around the mug. It was hot. Real. The boy eyed her curiously. "You got a name?" "Ellen," she said, voice rasped and dry. "Ellen May." The girls went still. Jonah gave the boy a look, and the boy went back to carving without another word. Jonah slid a plate in front of her. "Eat." She did. It tasted like salt and butter and something almost like home. No one asked where she came from. No one asked why her back bore the faint imprint of 90 lashes, or why her hands shook when she passed the water jug. That first day, they let her be. That first day, silence did the heavy lifting. She spent the next days mostly watching Jonah work the land with sure hands, his shirt damp with sweat by mid-morning. Watching the boy Luke ride fence with a solemnness far beyond his years. Watching the girls Hazel and Ruth play with the kind of imagination only children who'd known loss could carry. Ellen tried to be useful. She swept the porch, chopped onions with slow precision, mended shirts that had more holes than thread. She didn't speak much, but Jonah didn't seem to expect her to. One evening, as dusk settled like ash over the plains, Jonah handed her a bucket and nodded toward the chicken coop. "Fox got in last week. Still a few hens left. You up to collecting?" It was the first time he'd asked anything of her. She took the bucket without a word. The coop sat near the edge of the property, just beyond a split-rail fence, where the grass grew in patches and the land dipped slightly into a dry gully. The sun was setting, bleeding gold across the sky. Chickens clucked low, rustling in their roosts. She stepped inside, careful of the latch. The smell was thick earth, feathers, something sour. She reached under one of the hens, felt the smooth, warm curve of an egg. Her fingers trembled around it. A sound made her freeze. Not a fox, but memory. A crack of leather. A scream caught in her throat. The ring of boots on stone. She dropped the egg. It shattered at her feet. She sank to her knees, pressing her palms into the straw, trying to breathe. The coop blurred. Her back throbbed with phantom pain. It was coming again, the panic, the weight, the shame. Her body remembered what she tried to forget. And then quiet. Not silence, but something steadier. She heard footsteps. Slow. Measured. Jonah knelt beside the coop entrance. Not inside, not crowding her. He didn't speak. He didn't offer comfort. He just waited, and somehow that was enough. She collected the rest of the eggs with hands that shook less than before. That night, she stayed by the stove long after the others had gone to sleep, watching the embers. Jonah passed her a cup of coffee without a word, and sat across from her. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. But something shifted between them in the silence, a crack in the walls they'd both built. The storm rolled in 3 days later. Not one of lightning and thunder, but a gray, soaking kind that came from the north and flattened everything in its path. The wind pushed low against the walls of the house, and the windows moaned like old men in pain. The roof leaked in the far corner of the girls' room. Ellen found the drip before anyone else and set a pot beneath it. Rain had always unsettled her. Back in Oklahoma territory, storms meant ruin. Crops drowned, roofs collapsed, and men who drank too much would come home angry, wet, and mean. But this storm was different. It didn't feel like threat. It felt like a test. By midday, Jonah had brought the horses into the barn and sent the boy to fetch firewood. Ellen kept the girls busy stringing beans and peeling potatoes. The quiet hum of domestic work filled the space. It was the first time she felt the rhythm of belonging. Jonah came in, soaked through, his beard dripping and his shirt plastered to his chest. He gave her a nod, and she moved aside to let him dry near the stove. "I could use help in the barn," he said without looking at her. She dried her hands, grabbed her shawl, and followed. The barn was warm and thick with the smell of hay and horses. Rain beat on the roof like distant drums. Jonah handed her a grain scoop and pointed toward the feed bin. She moved without question. They worked in silence for a while. Boots scuffed on dirt. The horses snorted softly. When they were done, Jonah leaned against a beam and crossed his arms. "You were a preacher's wife," he said, not asking. She stiffened. Her back twitched where the scars lay quiet under her dress. "Yes, thought so. You got a way of being still that only comes from survivin' men who talk too much." She set the scoop down gently. "He's dead." Jonah nodded. "Had a feeling. You don't look like you're running. You look like you already arrived." She stared at him then, really stared. His face wasn't handsome in any real way, but it held something steady, a weathered strength, a quietness she hadn't known she needed. "3 kids, she said. "Your wife?" "Gone. Fever took her last spring. Hazel still asks if she's coming back. Ruth don't remember her much." He didn't speak with bitterness, just fact. The way men on the plains talked about broken wagons or failed crops. Ellen looked at her hands. "I can't give you children." The words fell heavy between them. Jonah didn't flinch. "I ain't asking for more kids." She blinked. "I'm asking if you want a place that don't hurt," he said. "Somewhere you can sleep without flinchin'. Help raise what's already here. I ain't needin' savin'. Just someone who knows what silence means." Ellen's breath caught in her throat. Outside, the rain slowed. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds and filtered through the barn's slats. Dust motes dancing like breath turned gold. She stepped forward, 1 inch at a time, until her hand rested near his on the beam. "I don't know how to start over." "You don't have to," Jonah said. "Just start." And there, in that barn that smelled of sweat and hay and quiet hope, Ellen felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the shape of it, the possibility. That night, the fire burned low, and Ellen sat in the kitchen stitching a torn apron. The girls giggled in the other room. Luke whittled near the hearth. Jonah read from a battered almanac, his voice low and steady. When Ellen rose to pour another cup of coffee, he looked up. She poured 2, set one in front of him. Their hands brushed. Neither of them moved away. Winter came hard that year. By mid-November, the wind had teeth, and the sky hung low, the color of old tin. Snow crept in with silence, laying down like a blanket that refused to melt. The world turned white and still, and time moved slower in the cold. Inside the house, life bent, but didn't break. Ellen had taken to waking before the others, stoking the fire and warming milk for the girls. Her hands no longer shook when she carried the kettle, and she moved with a kind of calm earned only through long silence and longer pain. The house was no longer just Jonah's. Her mended stitches lined the curtains. Her handwriting marked the lists tacked by the pantry door. Her touch lingered on the children's collars and cuffs, freshly sewn, patched, cleaned. Her presence filled the empty corners without asking permission. Still, she hadn't yet called it home. One afternoon, the snow fell heavy, muffling the world. Jonah was out checking fence lines, and the children had gone quiet, lulled by the hush. Ellen sat by the window, her lap full of wool scraps. Hazel curled beside her, thumb tucked in her mouth. The moment felt fragile, like something borrowed. And then came the knock. Sharp, fast, urgent. Ellen stood, heart quickening. Strangers didn't come in snow like this unless they meant trouble. She opened the door halfway. A man stood there, lean and nervous, with eyes like a snake's, cold, flickering, hungry. His coat was patched and stained, boots scuffed to the sole. Behind him, 2 more figures loomed silent, watching. "Looking for a woman," the man said. "Name of Ellen May." Her grip on the door tightened. Hazel stood behind her now, one hand on Ellen's skirt. The man smiled. "Heard she was out this way. Belonged to a Reverend Samuels back in Oklahoma. That her inside?" Ellen didn't answer. The cold swept in behind his words, sharper than before. The man stepped forward. She didn't move. "I ain't here to cause trouble," he said, though trouble curled around every word. "Just need to speak with her. Got something of his to return. Widow or not, she's still bound to—" The sound of a rifle cocking cut through the cold like a blade. Yonah. He stood on the porch behind the man, rifle leveled steady, face unreadable. "You'll want to step back," Jonah said quietly. The man turned, smiling still, but his hands lifted. "Didn't mean offense." Jonah didn't lower the rifle. "You bring offense. That's enough." The snow fell harder. The silence pressed in again. "You've got no right," the man said. "She was claimed. Bound before God." "She's here now," Jonah said. "Ain't yours to speak for." Ellen hadn't moved. Her heart was a drum. Hazel gripped her tighter. The man took a step back, muttering something under his breath. Then he turned, boots crunching through snow, and disappeared into the white, the others following like ghosts into fog. When Jonah turned to her, his face softened, just slightly. "You all right?" She nodded, though her knees had gone weak. He looked at her a moment longer, then stepped inside, setting the rifle by the door like a promise. That night, they sat by the fire long after the children had gone to sleep. The flames danced in the hearth, shadows curling like smoke along the floor. "I thought I'd have to keep running forever," she said. Jonah didn't look away. "You don't. He meant to drag me back, said I was bound." "You were. Then they broke you. That ain't what God calls marriage. That's just control with a Bible wrapped around it." She studied his face. "Why'd you speak for me?" "I didn't," he said. "I stood beside you." The quiet held. Then she reached across the table, slow and deliberate, and laid her hand over his. For the first time, she didn't pull away. For the first time, he didn't have to ask. The thaw came late that year, as if winter didn't want to loosen its grip. But one morning, the wind shifted. It smelled of wet soil and green things trying to break through. Snowmelt trickled down the sides of the hills, carving thin paths through mud and stone. The cottonwoods shivered, as if waking from a long sleep. Ellen stepped outside before dawn, shawl wrapped tight, boots sinking in the soft ground. The world was quiet but not dead. Birds began to return in pairs, calling to each other from fence posts and branches. The barn creaked in the breeze, but inside, the horses stirred with more energy. Even the hens clucked louder, greedy for the thaw. She closed her eyes and breathed in. Jonah watched her from the porch, arms crossed, leaning into the doorframe like he belonged there. He did. So did she. They hadn't spoken of marriage, not directly, but something unspoken had taken root between them. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't easy. It was a slow blooming, like the land waking up under her feet, something true and deep and steady. By April, she was teaching Ruth how to write her name in the dirt with a stick. Hazel had stopped asking if Mama was coming back. Luke had started calling her Miss Ellen less and just Ma when he forgot himself. Ellen never corrected him. One evening, Jonah handed her a small wooden box. She looked at him, puzzled, but he only nodded. "Go on." Inside was a ring, simple, no gem, just a smooth iron band, blackened and strong. "I forged it myself," he said. "Not much, but I figured you deserved a thing made honest." Her breath caught in her throat. "I ain't asking for more than you want to give," he said, "but I'd stand beside you, proper. Raise the kids together, make a life that don't hurt." Ellen stared down at the ring. It felt warm in her palm, like it carried heat from his hand. "I'm not whole," she whispered. "Neither am I." She looked up then, and nodded. They married beneath the cottonwoods a week later, with Luke holding Ruth's hand and Hazel clutching a wildflower bouquet Ellen had gathered from the edge of the pasture. Jonah wore his only clean shirt, and Ellen wore the same dress she'd arrived in mended now, with blue stitching at the hem. There was no preacher, just a promise spoken plain. "I won't run," she said. "I won't leave," he answered. They sealed it with hands clasped and eyes open. Spring pressed its full weight into the land that season. Ellen dug a garden by the southern fence, her back to the wind, her hands in the dirt. She planted potatoes, beans, and a row of sunflowers just because Hazel asked. Jonah carved a cradle for Ruth's dolls, then quietly built another, sturdier one that stayed empty in the corner of their room. Ellen didn't speak of it, but her hand lingered there sometimes, resting on the edge of the wood. By June, the fields had turned gold. The sky was wider. The house felt fuller. And one morning, Ellen stood barefoot on the porch, a letter in her hand creased, unread, from someone she'd once called kin. She let the wind take it. She watched it tumble, twist, and disappear across the prairie, the paper lifting and falling, never landing. Behind her, Jonah stepped out and wrapped an arm around her waist. She leaned into him. "Feels like the land knows I'm staying." He kissed the top of her head. "Maybe it was waiting on you." The sun climbed higher, warm on her skin. Inside, Ruth giggled. Luke slammed a door, chasing Hazel across the house, and in her belly, just beginning to stir, was the quietest promise of new life. She placed her hand there. Not everything broken stays that way.